The woman in the wheelchair didn't see it coming. Nobody in Gate 7 of Vancouver International Airport did. Not the business travelers hunched over their laptops. Not the family across the aisle, wrestling with a stroller. Not the gate agent scrolling her phone behind the counter. Nobody saw the moment a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher named Irene became invisible to a man who had never once in his life been told no. But one person noticed. He sat in the far corner of the waiting area, back against the wall, legs stretched out, wearing a faded olive-green jacket with no insignia on it. His name was Lucas, 37 years old, Navy SEAL, Naval Special Warfare Command, currently on 14 days of approved leave. He had a single carry-on bag at his feet and a German Shepherd beside him, whose name was Duke. Duke weighed 82 pounds. He had done 2 tours with Lucas in theater. He had a small scar along his left shoulder from a night in Kandahar that neither of them talked about anymore. Lucas was drinking bad airport coffee and reading nothing. He didn't need to read anything. He was watching the room the way he always watched rooms. Not anxiously, not suspiciously, just the way you watch weather when you've spent enough time outdoors to know that it changes fast and without announcement. The flight to Halifax was delayed 40 minutes. That was fine. Lucas was good at waiting. Irene was not having a fine morning. She had arrived early, the way she always did, because maneuvering a power wheelchair through an airport required twice the time and 3 times the energy that anyone standing ever thought it did. She'd been traveling alone since her husband passed 4 years ago. She had it down to a system. Check in at the desk on the lower level. Go through accessibility screening first. Follow the marked route to the gate. Find the wide aisle seats. Tuck the chair in close. Wait. She had her crossword. She had her thermos of Earl Grey. She had her boarding pass in the little zipped pocket of her purse that she could reach with her right hand. She did not have enough room, apparently. The man's name was Theodore Langford, 51 years old. He ran a private equity firm out of Toronto, with offices in Calgary and Vancouver. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent. He had a carry-on bag, a leather briefcase, and 2 adult sons who flanked him like bookends. Mid-20s, built wide, dressed in the same studied casual of men who've never had to worry about looking like they belong somewhere. Theodore wanted the outlet near the wall, the outlet that Irene's chair happened to be parked beside. "Excuse me," he said. Not a question. Irene looked up from her crossword. "Yes, you're blocking the outlet. I need to charge my laptop." She looked at the wall. She looked at her chair. She looked at the 4 empty seats between her and the next cluster of travelers. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not sure I can move much further without blocking the aisle." "The aisle is fine. Just shift over." "Sir, if I shift into the aisle, I'm going to obstruct. I'm not asking you to go far." His voice had that particular quality of a man who has never had to raise it to be obeyed. "Just a meter, that's all." Lucas set down his coffee. Duke's ears moved, just slightly, the way they did when something shifted in the ambient frequency of a room. Irene tried. She really did. She pressed the joystick on her chair, and it moved forward. Then she tried to angle right, but the configuration of seats and the support pillar to her left meant that anywhere she went, she was either in the aisle or too close to the next row of chairs to be safe. She stopped. She looked at Theodore Langford with the patience of a woman who had been navigating a world not built for her for 11 years. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I genuinely can't." "You genuinely can't," he repeated it. Not to her. To his sons, with a small exhale of incredulity, the kind that isn't really disbelief at all, but is instead a statement of hierarchy. A public broadcast of the fact that he considered her an inconvenience rather than a person. The older son, a thick-necked young man who'd clearly absorbed his father's frequency like a tuning fork, pulled out the chair directly in front of Irene and sat down, pressing his knees almost against her footrest. "There's plenty of room," he said to nobody. "She's just not trying." "Please don't do that," Irene said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. We paid for these seats the same as everyone else. You paid for the seats. I'm not in a seat." The second son laughed. Just a short, airless sound. But in a quiet gate waiting area at 7:40 in the morning, it landed like something thrown. There are moments in public spaces where everyone around a conflict makes the same silent calculation, the math of intervention, the cost of getting involved. Most people complete that equation in favor of looking away, because looking away is free and getting involved costs something: dignity, time, the possibility of making it worse. Lucas finished his coffee. He stood up. Duke stood up with him. "Hey." His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that took up more space than a raised voice would have. Theodore turned. He looked at Lucas, at the jacket, the dog, the absolute absence of hurry in Lucas's posture, and something in his face recalibrated. He was a man who read people for a living, and what he read here didn't slot neatly into any category he was used to dealing with. "This doesn't concern you," Theodore said. She asked him to stop. Lucas nodded at the son still sitting with his knees crowding Irene's chair. "He should stop. We're just trying to charge a laptop up. There's an outlet on the pillar across from gate 6. Lucas said it without looking away. "I saw it when I came in." Silence. Theodore looked at his sons. One of them looked at the floor. The other looked at Lucas in the way that young men sometimes look at men they can't quite place. Too still to be a civilian, too young to be retired, no insignia to identify. "Who do you think you are?" the older son said. Duke sat down. He did this not out of boredom but out of training. A sitting dog is a controlled dog. Lucas had taught him that stillness was a form of communication, that you didn't always need to show teeth to be understood. "My name's Lucas," he said. "I'm asking you to give the lady some space." What happened next would later be described in 3 different ways by 3 different people who were there. The gate agent would say she saw the older son stand up suddenly, and that things escalated quickly. The family across the aisle would say the son shoved Lucas first. A man who had been pretending to read a magazine 3 rows back would say he saw the son reach toward Lucas's arm in a grabbing motion. What is not in dispute is that Duke made a sound, not a bark, not a growl in the conventional sense. It was lower than that and much more specific, the sound of an animal communicating, with absolute precision, that a boundary had been approached and that the next step across it would have consequences. The son went still. Everyone went still. "Atlas, sit," Lucas said. And then, to the group, "Let's all take a breath." He hadn't moved from where he stood. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't touched anyone. That, somehow, made it worse for Theodore Langford, who was a man who understood leverage and who suddenly found himself in a situation with none. "That dog is a threat," Theodore said. "I'm calling someone." "He's a certified military working dog and I have documentation," Lucas said. "You're welcome to call whoever you'd like. There are certain rooms in a person's life that you think you'll leave without incident, and then you don't." Theodore went to the gate agent. Lucas sat back down beside Irene, who was gripping her crossword pencil with both hands and not writing anything. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I used to be a teacher. I spent 31 years telling children that how you treat people when nobody's watching is who you really are." Lucas nodded. "Does it get easier, watching people prove that wrong?" She considered it seriously. "No," she said, "but I think it matters more when you don't look away." Duke put his chin on her knee. She laughed, a real laugh, startled out of her, and put her hand on his head, and for about 40 seconds the gate at Vancouver International Airport felt, improbably, like the least terrible place in the world. Then the airport security officers arrived. There were 2 of them, and they came directly to Lucas, not to Theodore, not to his sons, to Lucas and Duke. This is one of those moments that reveals, with uncomfortable clarity, what assumptions get made and in what order. "Sir, we've had a complaint about an aggressive dog." Lucas looked at them with the same expression he'd worn the entire morning, neutral, unhurried, attentive. "Okay," he said. "We're going to need you to come with us." "Can I ask what the specific complaint was?" The dog made threatening movements toward another passenger. Irene spoke up immediately. "That's not what happened." Her voice was sharp now, all the careful steadiness gone. "That man," she pointed toward Theodore, who was watching from near the gate counter with his arms crossed, "was harassing me." This man intervened. "The dog did nothing except sit. Ma'am, we have to investigate all complaints." "Then investigate it properly. Start with me." The officer hesitated. He was young. He had the look of someone who had been told to respond to a call, and had not been told what he would find when he got there. Lucas stood. He was cooperative. He was calm. He said to Irene, "It'll be okay." He said it the way he might say it to a person being evacuated. Not dismissively, but with the specific weight of someone who has been in worse rooms than this and come out the other side. They took him to the security office at the end of the terminal. They made Duke wait in a separate anteroom, and this, more than the escort, more than the questions, more than the growing suspicion that Theodore Langford was on the phone with someone who would make this more complicated, was the thing that tightened something in Lucas's chest. Duke didn't do well separated from him in unfamiliar environments. Duke was trained, disciplined, reliable under nearly any circumstance. But Duke was also an animal who had spent years operating in high-stress situations, bonded to one specific human, and being put in a strange room alone was not nothing. Lucas sat in the chair across from the security supervisor. A woman named nothing he was going to remember, in a beige room with a motivational poster about teamwork on the wall, and he answered every question they asked him. Yes, he had intervened in a situation. No, he had not touched anyone. No, Duke had not made contact with anyone. Yes, he had documentation for Duke's certification. Yes, he was aware of the regulations for traveling with a military working animal. What he did not say, because they did not ask, was that his name was Petty Officer First Class Lucas Holt, that he had served 11 years in naval special warfare, that he had 4 operational deployments, and a service record that would take the supervisor about 20 minutes to pull up if she knew where to look. He didn't say it because it didn't feel like something he should have to say. He was not wrong. What he didn't know, sitting in that beige room, was that back at Gate 7, Irene was not done. Irene had flagged down a different gate agent, a woman in her 40s who had the specific expression of someone who has been working customer-facing roles long enough to have seen everything, and who still, somehow, cares. "Her name tag," said Donna. "I want to make a formal statement," Irene said. "Of course," Donna said. She pulled out the right form without being asked. Irene talked for 12 minutes. She was precise. She had the name Theodore Langford because she had heard his sons call him that. She had the time of the initial interaction. She had the specific things that were said. She was a woman who had spent 31 years in classrooms, where the difference between a he said, she said, and a documented incident was the ability to reconstruct events in sequence. And she reconstructed them with the fluency of a person who had been paying attention when everyone else assumed she wasn't. Donna took the statement. She also pulled the CCTV request form without being asked. There are some people in every institution who know which lever does what. Donna was one of those people. What the cameras showed, when reviewed, was everything in the order it happened. Theodore and his sons moving into Irene's space. Irene's attempts to comply and her inability to do so safely. The son sitting down in front of her. The laugh. Lucas standing. The calm exchange. The son's sudden forward movement toward Lucas. Duke's response. Lucas's command. Lucas's continued stillness. What the cameras also showed, incidentally, was Theodore Langford on his phone during the security officer's initial response, not watching the situation, not concerned, but speaking to someone with the ease of a man who expected a call to handle a problem for him. The RCMP officer who came to relieve the airport security team an hour later was a woman who had been doing this for 16 years. Her name was Constable Levesque. She read the security report. She watched the footage. She went to the anteroom where Duke was sitting, looked at him for a moment through the window, went back to the main office, and said to the security supervisor, "Why is that man still in this room?" The supervisor said, "We were investigating. The footage is 20 minutes old," Levesque said. "You've had it for 15. She looked at it the way someone looks at a situation that has been made more complicated than it needed to be. "Where's complainant?" Theodore Langford was still at the gate. His flight had been called. He was expecting to board it. He did not board it. Levesque went to him with the specific posture of authority that has no need to perform itself, and she asked him to come with her, and he said that he had a flight to catch and that he had already spoken to his lawyer, and she said, "Sir, the flight will wait," in the particular tone of someone who knows it will not, but who also knows that this is not, at this moment, the relevant point. Lucas was released from the security room with an apology that the supervisor seemed genuinely uncomfortable delivering, not because she was insincere, but because she clearly wasn't sure how to frame the fact that the apology was overdue. She handed him back Duke's documentation and said, "Your dog was not at any point considered a threat by our assessment," Lucas said. "Okay." He collected Duke from the anteroom. Duke pressed against his leg for a moment, then straightened, and they walked back down the terminal together. Irene was at the gate. She had a new cup of tea. She had her crossword open. She looked up when she saw him, and something in her expression settled, the way a room settles when a window that's been banging in the wind finally gets latched shut. "I told them everything," she said. "I know," Lucas said. "I heard." He sat down. Duke sat beside him. The flight to Halifax was now boarding. This is where most stories about airports end. The security resolved, the villain escorted off, everyone catching their respective flights. Neat, contained, the machinery of justice moving with more efficiency than it usually does. But the story didn't end at the airport. Theodore Langford's lawyer did call. He called the airport authorities' legal department. He called a contact he had at the municipal level. He called, by all accounts, every person he could think of who might be able to frame what the cameras showed as ambiguous. Cameras are not ambiguous. The footage was reviewed by the airport's legal team, by the RCM, and eventually, because of the specific nature of Lucas's documentation and the involvement of a certified military working dog, by a liaison officer at Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt who happened to be in communication with Lucas's commanding officer as a matter of routine notification. This is the thing about leverage that Theodore Langford had not calculated. It works in multiple directions. The formal complaint filed by Theodore against Lucas and Duke was dismissed within 4 days. The statement made by Irene, combined with the footage, was referred to the RCMP for review of Theodore's conduct and that of his sons, specifically the forward movement toward Lucas, which the reviewing officer described in writing as an attempted physical contact consistent with an aggressive advance. Theodore's lawyer sent a letter, then another. The letters became fewer and quieter as the weeks passed, and the footage remained exactly what it was. Lucas didn't follow any of this in real time. He was in Halifax, staying at his sister's place for the first time in almost 3 years. He walked Duke along the waterfront every morning. He slept past 6 for the first time since his last leave. His sister made him breakfast and asked him no questions about work, which was, he thought, one of the greatest things another person can do for you. He got a call from his commanding officer in the second week. Not about the incident, about his redeployment timeline. He took the call on the back porch with Duke at his feet, and the Atlantic doing what it does in late autumn, gray and restless and indifferent. He called Irene 2 days before he flew back. He had gotten her number through Donna at the airport, who had, after a moment's consideration, decided that some protocols exist to protect people, and some exist only as habit, and that giving a good woman's number to the man who stood up for her fell into neither category worth refusing. Irene answered on the second ring. They talked for 20 minutes. She told him her son had seen the story on a community news site. Apparently a passenger who'd been at the gate had posted about it, and it had been shared enough times that a local reporter had called the airport for comment. The airport had said nothing, which the reporter had written about anyway. "Your name wasn't in it," Irene said. "Good," Lucas said. "Mine was," she said. "I gave permission. I thought, if this happens to me at an airport, it happens somewhere to someone every day. Maybe it helps for people to know that you don't have to just sit there and take it." Lucas looked out at the water. "Did it help?" "I got 11 emails," she said. "From people in wheelchairs, people who've been told to move or to be quiet or to stop blocking things. One of them was a veteran." Lucas didn't say anything for a moment. He said he'd been to 3 airports that year, and not one person had said a word when someone was rude to him. Irene's voice was steady and sad, and something else underneath, the specific emotion of someone who is not surprised, but is still, after a long life, affected. "He said he wished someone like you had been there." "There are people like that everywhere," Lucas said. "Most of them don't have a dog that weighs 80 pounds. She laughed. He'd come to like that laugh. The way it arrived suddenly, like she hadn't planned it. Duke was asleep against his leg, twitching slightly, running through something in his sleep. Lucas put his hand on the dog's back and he settled. There's a version of this story that ends with a courthouse, with named charges and formal proceedings, and something that can be measured and framed and pointed at as proof that the system worked. And that version is still being written, somewhere in RCMP files and legal correspondence and the slow grind of institutional accountability. But that version is not what Lucas carried back with him when he flew home. What he carried was smaller and harder to explain. It was the image of Duke putting his chin on Irene's knee, and her laugh breaking open the quiet of a gate waiting room. It was the way she had said, without bitterness, that it matters more when you don't look away. He had spent 11 years being trained to respond to threats, to assess situations, to intervene with precision and leave without excess. He had never, before Gate 7 of Vancouver International, thought of those skills as things that could be used in an airport waiting area for a woman with a crossword and a thermos of Earl Grey. But that's the thing about training. You carry it everywhere. You carry it into terminals and onto waterfronts and back porches and phone calls and all the ordinary unremarkable places that are, it turns out, where most of the actual protecting gets done. Duke woke up. He looked at Lucas with the specific attentiveness of an animal who has decided you might be about to do something and is prepared to do it with you. "Not yet," Lucas said. Duke put his head back down. "The narrator wants you to know one last thing. Theodore Langford missed his flight to Halifax that day. He rebooked on the next available, first class, and he sat in his seat and he did not speak to anyone around him, which was, under the circumstances, the best decision he made all morning." Irene's crossword, 14 across, was a 7-letter word for quiet dignity in the face of injustice. She'd had it for 3 minutes before the Langfords arrived. She filled it in on the plane,